Welcome back, and welcome to your third sample question with regard to spouses, common law partners, conjugal partners, as it relates to family class, of course, which relates in a large way to your upcoming ICCRC Full Skills Exam. So this question here touches upon another topic that we talked about in the lesson, and that is the 3 or 5 year sponsorship bar as it relates to your upcoming exam. So if you have a really great knowledge of that topic, this question might even be easy for you. If you're still learning about that topic as it relates to your exam, of course, then this is going to be a great lesson for you because you get to see it really in the context of a question that you might face in the exam. So here we have Victoria and Ram. Now, Victoria and Ram met each other in high school, and they kept a long-distance relationship throughout college. As Ram was born in Canada and both of his parents are Canadian, he is a dual citizen of both Britain and Canada. Victoria is a dual citizen of Estonia and Britain because her parents are Estonian. The couple broke up in 2014 because Ram wanted to live in Canada so that he can work in Toronto, and Victoria wanted to stay in Britain because she loved her career and didn't want to leave all of her friends. Ram went on to work as an accountant in Toronto but missed Victoria dearly. So when he went back to England for a visit, he proposed, to which Victoria happily said yes, and they married quickly the next week. 1 year later, Victoria was miserable living in Toronto, and the couple decided it was best to divorce. When will Ram be able to sponsor another spouse? So here we have A. He won't be able to sponsor again until Victoria leaves Canada. We have B. He will have to wait for 3 years from the day Victoria arrived in Canada. We have C. He is a Canadian citizen, so he can sponsor another partner right away. And we have D. He will have to wait until the divorce is finalized until he can sponsor a spouse again. Okay, so if you understand the concept of the sponsorship bar, then you probably know the answer already, and that's pretty amazing because that means you would have answered this in under a minute. If you do not understand the sponsorship bar or just how to translate that into an exam setting, don't worry, we'll work through this one step by step together, and it'll help you in case you face that topic in your exam. Okay, so we have some important pieces of information in here. We have the sponsor's status, of course, so he's a citizen of both Canada and Britain. And we have kind of his life story a little bit for the sponsor. So he's in Canada, went back to England for a visit, married and divorced. So let's take a look at this together, and we'll go through each answer one by one, just so that you know the part of the process to work through in answering a question like this correctly. All right, so let's start with A over here now. A says he won't be able to sponsor again until Victoria leaves Canada. Now the key to understanding if this one is correct or incorrect is understanding the undertaking. So remember that, of course, a sponsor can't sponsor another person if they defaulted on an undertaking, or if they owe money, or they're bankrupt, or anything like that. Now, in this case here, when we look at A, he won't be able to sponsor again until Victoria leaves Canada, you could see this isn't really relevant to the option that we're deciding on. So as we can see, there's no real mention about whether or not the person leaves Canada or not in terms of an undertaking. What is needed, of course, is for the sponsor to take care of the person he or she is sponsoring for the duration of the undertaking. And as we saw before, we've seen this a couple times now in the lessons, the undertaking means that basically it's ensuring that the person being sponsored won't need government assistance later on. In the case of a spouse or a common law partner or conjugal partner, the length is 3 years. And that is, of course, from the time that the person enters Canada. Now, when we compare this to option A, we could see over here, and just from our understanding of undertakings, that the person doesn't have to leave Canada. The person who was sponsored doesn't have to leave Canada, although there certainly is a time limit here, which goes into one of the other options that we're going to look at. Okay, so we could be pretty sure that A is incorrect. Now let's take a look at another option. So you can see that D has a very similar theme in here. Now, D states that he will have to wait until the divorce is finalized until he can sponsor a spouse again. So you should be thinking of a couple elements of divorce should jump into your head at this point. So remember, of course, the divorce has to be finalized in order to sponsor somebody else. And remember that for the person being sponsored, if it's the spouse or common law partner or conjugal partner who was sponsored, remember they have to prove that they've been divorced or separated for at least a year before they can be sponsored again. Now, remember, Ram was the sponsor, so this is a little bit different for him. So we know that D is incorrect because with this one here, of course, they're divorced. But when we explore a couple of the other options here, you're going to see why D is incorrect. It'll make it a little bit more clear, because being divorced, of course, is one of the important things. But there's the timeline as well that pretty much overrides that. And that has to do with what we talked about before, which is the sponsored restriction bar. Okay, so we have C over here. And now we have C says he is a Canadian citizen, so he can sponsor another partner right away. Remember, well, being a Canadian citizen and a permanent resident in this case doesn't really make a difference. We saw the 3 or 5 year sponsorship bar. Now that, of course, relates to citizens, Canadian citizens, and permanent residents in the exact same way. With the example we saw in the lesson, we saw the example of John and Sylvia. So remember, John, who's a Canadian citizen, can't sponsor another spouse for 3 years. Because for him, as a sponsor, he is restricted from sponsoring another spouse, common law partner, or conjugal partner for 3 years. And just to add on to that, Sylvia, in this case, who was sponsored as a spouse, common law partner, conjugal partner, would not be able to sponsor someone else as a spouse, common law partner, conjugal partner for 5 years. As we are talking about Ram, he would be in the same situation as John. Okay, so we know that C is incorrect, and that gave us a lot of little hints towards knowing if B is correct. So let's explore that one as well. So B says he will have to wait for 3 years from the day Victoria arrived in Canada. Now, as we saw, he certainly has to wait for 3 years from the day Victoria arrived in Canada because of this sponsorship bar. So he's the Canadian citizen, who sponsored Victoria, who's a foreign national. And now they divorced, of course, but he would have to wait 3 years. In their case, if you remember from the story, they divorced a year after they got married. So that divorce would have been 1 year because they were in Canada, and then he has to wait 2 more years before he can sponsor someone else. And in his case, remember, he still has that undertaking, so he has to really make sure that Victoria doesn't go on social assistance and that kind of thing. Otherwise, he would obviously have to pay for it. Okay, the final point here, I think, really comes into play in this question, which is that the undertaking is an unconditional promise of support. In this case, the couple divorced. Now that doesn't cancel the undertaking. Even if they moved, if they lost their jobs or anything like that, it doesn't cancel the undertaking. So we can see that B is correct. And if you had a good knowledge of that sponsored restriction bar, you would have hopefully gotten this correct right away. So I hope you enjoyed this question here, and you're probably starting to have a better understanding of all the little puzzle pieces that have to do with spousal sponsorship, well, conjugal partner and common law sponsorship, as it relates to your upcoming full skills exam. All right, so thanks again for all your hard work, and we'll talk in the next lesson.